Hi, Jess.
Hey Matt, good
How are you
morning.
today? Good morning. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
That is fantastic to hear. It's great to see you again. I'm excited. We've got another episode lined up, and I think in our pre-recording conversation, we've got a chance to already kind of get to know. Well, I should take it back. Actually, you already know our next guest from before. Is that right?
I do. Yes, absolutely. We met at RSA last year and have been, working together ever since. So really excited about this episode.
Awesome. Likewise. All right. Well, instead of referring to him as our guest in the third person, why don't we just bring him up on stage? Adam Bateman from Push Security. How you doing, sir?
Hey, how's it going? I'm feeling proud about being one of your early guests on the new podcast. So
Well, I'm going to start off then with nothing but gratitude because a huge thank you for being here with us and for joining us. And we had a little bit of a brief discussion before we clicked that record button, and it was really cool that you're able to see kind of what it is we're looking to reach and who we're looking to get to this. And you're the perfect guest to come and talk to us a little bit about what that journey as a founder looks like. So, with that said, Adam, it's great to have you here. Number one. Number two, please tell us a little bit about your company. What is it? What is it that you guys do?
yeah, sure. So we're a SaaS cybersecurity platform, but specifically we help people to defend against identity-based attacks. So the idea is
Mm,
it's kind of the analogy is like it's kind of like an EDR but sits in the browser. There's a lot of talk about the browser's a new
mm,
operating system. Attacks are starting to move out into the cloud and start to not touch the endpoint in the network. So we actually plug a browser extension into all the employees' browsers, and then we can actually generate some really unique telemetry. And we observe identities as employees use them, flag ones that are vulnerable, and also sort of deflect any attacks like phishing and things from advanced phishing frameworks and those sorts of things.
wow. Okay. So there's so much to unpack there from a security perspective. First off, I want to like pick on a little bit one of the things that you said that I want to make sure a lot of folks out there understand, which is adversaries don't live in traditional endpoint land anymore. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really
Yeah.
interesting because we've been playing this game for a little while. Like my background is in red teaming, and so my goal has always
Hmm.
been to stay right at the front of the emerging threat and seeing what's happening. So we've been keeping an eye on this for quite a few years, and now 2023 it all kicked off. Like you've seen groups like the Scattered Spider, you saw loads of identity-based
Mm.
breaches really happening into 2024 is the year of identity. So yeah, it's interesting for us to see the awareness starting to raise up in the industry. But I think the industry's got a long way to go because it's quite fresh, these style of attacks. So
Yeah. Is this mechanism fresh as well? I mean, identity, the use of identity tools and things for authentication or for authorization and stuff. I mean, this isn't new, right? We've had
no,
this around for quite a while. I mean, from an implementation perspective.
yeah, I mean, identity's been around forever. I think the difference is the exposure. So,
Mm,
previously, when I was a pen tester, we used to do network-based hacking, and we'd go straight for the accounts. Like every time, it was like hack the domain controller, gain access to domain admin, start pivoting around the network, logging in. I think the
hmm.
difference is now that everyone's shifted to the clouds. Networks are for new startups. People don't even have networks, right? They're just like us. We're just a bunch of laptops. We all work in the
Hmm.
browser. We're like 150 SaaS applications with AWS workloads and whatever else. And so
Yep.
the identities are all now internet facing. And so for us, the biggest threat is vulnerable internet facing identities. And attackers can just go straight after them without touching any of your endpoints, any network whatsoever. So yeah, I think like identities has been around
Hmm.
for a long time, but thinking of it as a major attack surface, that's the part that's new, and
Mm.
it's given the industry a lot of focus. So
I like that. I think that's first off recognizing that you know the defenses that we employ and put in place, they have to be where the adversaries are, right? First off, we can't be behind, obviously, because then we're just behind the curve and we're just getting attacked. And that was what 2022 2023 was. We were behind in this element. But then fast forwarding and saying, hey, not only do we have the technology to match this, because I would maybe argue, and Adam, we'll probably cover this throughout today's episode as well, but I would argue that some of the defensive mechanisms folks have in place, we might not have had the right technology for a while ago.
Mm.
You know, like the implementation, the idea was there from an infrastructure perspective, but the ability to actually do it, you know, was tough. And that may be due to a myriad of reasons. But I like how you're calling out, look, this is where the adversaries are right here. Okay. This is where the adversaries are. This is what they're doing. This is what they're taking advantage of. And that's where we're going to meet them, is we're going to meet them right at where they're actionable. And I got to say, this is a little bit more refreshing than saying we detect a better ransom note than everybody else does, which might be the final end goal of that. So awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So Adam, I have a question. You know, there are tons of challenges out there and different ways to help solve cybersecurity challenges. And I'd say one of the toughest is starting a company. So I would love to hear, you know, about your journey as a founder, why you decided to get on this crazy roller coaster.
Yeah, no, it's funny because different people have different motives for starting a company. But for me, I couldn't not start a company. I'm just obsessed with building stuff. Like I've always been like that. It's like just doesn't matter whether I drive my wife crazy because I took a few months off at some point, and she was like, "I see you less now than when you were working full time," because I was just like working on the house and the garden. It doesn't matter what it is. It's just like creating something from a blank canvas and seeing it develop is just really big for me. And so, yeah, I've just carried that through my whole career. So as I said, I was a practitioner for a long time. Like I've been in the industry for 20 or so years, and I was a practitioner. I was doing virtual CISOing, and I've done incident response, I've done detection, I've done red teaming, and all these different things. And throughout that time, I found myself just getting lured closer and closer into service development. Right, I was hacking, I was defending, but I was interested in progressing the business and actually going home at the end of each day and say, okay, I moved something forward. And so, yeah, I've just been also very mission driven. I'm very much in this to leave a mark on the industry and actually improve that, given the fact I've seen a lot of different companies and a lot of different security challenges. It's important to me just to see it develop and just see us all progress forward. And so for me, I think the amalgamation of being mission driven and loving to develop stuff, it was kind of, I started a company and everyone went, yeah, of course you're going to be a founder. Like, I'm surprised it's taken you this length of time. So that's kind of why I came into it from a personal perspective. In terms of the actual challenge that we solved and why we picked this as a path, as I said, red teaming for a long time, you naturally end up right on the front line of looking for the most emerging techniques. And I think when I first got into the industry, the company attack surface was literally open ports on public IP addresses, right? That's what it looked like. You were port scanning, you were vulnerability scanning, you were owning Citrix servers and pivoting through the DMZ, and that was what we did. And then
Wait, that
I
sounds like
watched
last week. Hold on.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's a long time ago. But yeah, it's but exactly, yes. And that was really that was my job as a pen tester. I was just doing that. You have the odd web application that would come up, but you weren't doing client side attacks and endpoint compromises at that time. But yeah, just over the time, I just noticed gradually it got tougher, and we did a better job of locking that down because it's almost this like flat, much more what you call a traditional perimeter, and it is possible to get a handle on that. And so then we started shifting over to doing client side attacks. And at the time, it was like shooting fish in a barrel. Sending people, like getting them to open documents with macros and executing code. The best you had to do was bypass AV. It was really interesting then because EDR then came up and it made it a lot harder and it became a really mainstream thing. But I really remember that point in my career where we were just running riot over companies and they were just going, no, you haven't compromised us. Like our perimeter's fine. And no, we're just, we've executed executed code on one of your employees' endpoints and we've got control that way. And it was just big gaps. So when we did a lot of stuff on like the early EDR space, and then really I think looking back and going, okay, what's next? For us, it became really obvious that this was happening, this big shift to cloud, and that's where I see this third attack surface, like identities in the cloud, and it feels very, very similar to when the EDR side came up. There's no visibility there. People don't understand the attacks as well. They just don't see that stuff happening. And we were like, look, this is the problem we've got to go and solve. And so we just jumped in to really help move the industry forward in that particular area.
That's it's interesting. So you're seeing the same type of I don't want to say ignorance, Adam, and I mean that very very lightly. I don't want to say that word, but you're seeing the same type of lack of awareness as kind of like the early EDR days of where it was kind of like, yeah, hey, this thing is possible and it's being exploited rampantly.
Yeah, definitely, and it's
Mm,
understandable, right? I mean, I think you think like in every other industry, people feel their own pain. Like if you're in finance and you find it really, really hard to process finance, you feel the pain, you go and find a solution to solve that pain, you understand it. But actually, even though there are some aspects of cybersecurity where you do feel your own pain, when it comes to threats, it's the attacker that inflicts the pain on you, right? And there's
mm-hmm,
so much stuff to do. Like you can't know every single tactic and the way that attacks. It's very, very hard to keep that up to date. And so it's natural that the attackers move first, and then there's a lag
mm-hmm,
before the industry catches up and understands that. And I think even it's true
of
with
course.
adoption of technology. Like people adopt technology first, they learn it, they suss it out, they determine if it's here to
Mm-hmm,
stay or if it's just a passing fad. And then once they know it's here to stay, then they start putting the effort into actually thinking about security, and then that lags behind. So it's pretty
mm,
normal for that to happen, but it feels very, very similar to me in the EDR world because it was really interesting because at that time when EDR didn't exist, we didn't have visibility on the endpoints like we do today. The big question was, how much is this happening? Like, is it not happening, or is it just not happening because there's no
mm-hmm.
visibility there to raise that? And the same thing's occurring now, where you started to see at the end of last year a number of breaches, and I don't want to name particular companies because it's not the thing to do, but there are a number of different breaches here to
We
do
all
with
know. We
people's.
all know.
Yeah, we don't know. But yeah, like different people's Twitter accounts getting compromised and support
Mm-hmm,
systems getting compromised, and they're using that to pivot through. And none of those things touch the endpoint or the network at all. And it's just very, very
mm-hmm.
difficult. Like you can't even get logs from a lot of these systems, so it's under the radar. And I think there's just a huge gap there that needs to be filled in terms of both awareness and technology.
Yeah, you're calling out what I think is, and this is a very almost IR driven point that you've just made here, which is very much around, hey, if the thing that the adversary takes advantage of or abuses has tons of telemetry around it, then it's really easy for us to just start to observe an attack and then model forward, right? I usually use Windows event logs as a really easy example here of the structure is so well known that there is an entire open source community dedicated towards detecting bad stuff inside of these things. And I feel like that's something that a lot of folks have become used to, and a lot of security benchmarks get written around is that ability to detect. And there's tons of metrics around this, right? MTTD, MTTR, all of these things are wrapped around detection capabilities. And I find it interesting to say, or to hear, I should say, that you're seeing, yeah, it's not there. It's not comparable with the other technologies that we're seeing and whatnot. What I'm curious then, how does that align you guys at Push Security with like a customer base? Like, what is the ideal customer for you guys that you're looking for from an implementation perspective?
Yeah, being focused on a particular customer base is very important. But I think because this is a
Mm,
new area, we actually, as much as we try to focus, we get pulled in all different directions. So I'd say that when we started off, our sweet spot, the customer we had in mind was like the 1,000 to 5,000 type, like kind of lower enterprise customer. And we did that really, I
mm,
think, not just because of suitability, but that's the size where you really start to, you're really thinking about security a lot. You might have your own internal detection team. You're interested in that sort of telemetry,
mm,
but you're also, from our perspective as a startup trying to optimize for sales cycles, they're a bit quicker to move and work with, and you get feedback a lot better. So that's really where we focus. But we have customers as small as 20 people that just sign up self-service and use the platform, right up to
mm,
large enterprise. So we keep getting pulled out of that sector. But for us, it's much more about, it's actually a lot less about the company or the size or demographic of the company. It's much more about the person. So
mm,
we seek out forward-leaning security people, like people who think about these emerging trends, and they think about the attacks that can come up, and they're guarding, their fortress, and they want to think about all the other clever ways. And so we put out a lot of very novel research on new attack techniques. Like we've been named a ton of different attacks and stuff. And so the people that follow us are those sorts of individuals, specifically like, IAM teams who will be more proactive and try and lock down vulnerable identities, but then detection and response teams who are more interested in detection and response type use cases inside those companies.
Gotcha. For our listeners who just heard Adam walk through what targeting a customer base versus actually being in a customer base looks like, take some notes, because once you've got technology that works, you've got a product, a platform, a service that works and helps. And Adam, I think we called this out in the very beginning here. The thing, for use of a generic term, that you're securing is seen across enterprises of all sizes across the board. So there's a point where it's like, hey, if it works, it works. And the more the merrier, right? We're happy to see that, which is great news, is great news.
Yeah. And that's maybe
I find it interesting. Also, go ahead.
No, go on. Sorry.
Go ahead, Adam.
I was just thinking there's another similarity to EDR, I guess. I mean, if you think about EDR, the customers there range from very, very small all up to very, very large, but the way they actually utilize the platform is different. So you wouldn't find, typically, there are obviously always outliers, but you wouldn't typically find a very small company that has an internal detection team that's using their EDR to pull the telemetry in and with a 24/7 SOC. They might use it via an MSP or a partner, or they might just use it for the automated alerting functionality, because that's enough for them. But then when you go up to larger companies, then it's, your tool is being probably not used via the UI. It's being used just specifically through the APIs, and then you're drawing the telemetry out. And so, yeah, I think it's similar with our platform, is that we do focus very specifically on the type of user that we want to attract to the platform, but it gets pulled, larger companies will just pull the data out of it and not use the interface, whereas smaller companies will use more of the kind of batteries included functionality, I guess.
It's a great way of summarizing that. I really like the way that you put kind of a pin on that. Jess, sorry, you had a question, or I think something to say about the customers.
Yeah, no, not necessarily a question. Just you brought up a really important point, and I think in a lot of these innovative early cyber companies, we're really looking to solve unique challenges that maybe the broader market doesn't understand or isn't looking to solve immediately, right? So identifying those forward thinking, those cloud mature companies who have the folks internally who are paying a little bit more attention and are those early adopters, I think is really critical to founders to understand, to identify those people, do the research, be of value in that community, to get those early adopters. And obviously, the broader adoption will follow as time goes on and there's more awareness. But that's a very important point that I think a lot of folks don't think about when they're building a company and their go-to-market, and how do we do this and reach those folks. So I'm really glad that you did point that out, because it's something that I think Matt and I talk about very frequently, and with a lot of other founders as well.
Yeah. And that's a point that's very close to my heart. That's like, because when you go through it for a stand, you realize how much you appreciate those early adopters and the dynamic there. It's like, I kind of think of it like, as a founder, it's in the job description that you have to see something in the world that other people haven't seen, right? So you've seen something, you have some vision, you can see something a lot clearer than everyone else can, you're going to go get it. But the problem is, as an early stage founder, you need everyone else to see it, because otherwise no one's going to come on the journey with you. So you have this tension where you're like, you're like seeing something no one else can, but you've got to go and find the other people and say, like, can you see this as well? And so, yeah, those early adopters, those people who sort of see the world in forward thinking, are just so valuable to you. And actually, what I'm grateful to. When I started, I thought, oh, wow, these people are doing me a favor. They're taking a leap with us. But actually, what I realized as we got further into it is it works both ways. And actually, the most forward-thinking CISOs I know will say, look, I'm not going to use a startup for a big established category that's been around for a long time and is very mature. I'll just go with the vendor, and I'm just going to get what is there, and I'm going to get the support that comes with it. But for new challenges, I'm going to go pick a startup or a new way of doing things where I can build a close relationship and I can actually have a say in the roadmap, and we can work on this together. and they sort of are proud of being an early adopter. Like they sort of say they were part of this early trend, and it's those people you have to look for. So yeah, for me, any platform that pulls those types of people together is really, really valuable for both sides.
Wow. Adam, that was a very impactful last 60 seconds that you just went through, only because I think it really, like, first off, I had a question for you about the validity of security experience when you're trying to push that vision with folks. Like, is it easier to kind of say, hey, the adversary can do this, and is it easier if there's someone who says, yep, I totally get it, I've seen it happen? Or is it more folks are reading headlines and they're like, I need to find protection for this right now? Is it more an understanding of the threat, or is it more fear of the threat that you find is I don't want to say the easier conversation to have, but maybe what's more common for you these days?
It's hard to pick one because I think it depends on the individual. Like I can say that, because I'm from a red team, then blue team background, when I talk to security teams who are also from that background, we can, make very similar comparisons. Like I was saying about the 3 different perimeters, like open ports on public IP addresses, then EDR. Now it's kind of vulnerable identities on the internet. People are like, yeah, I really understand this, and they connect at that level. Other people don't have that background, right? And there's huge value, I think, in our industry, the fact that people do come from all different walks of life. But you talk sort of pen testing analogies, people don't understand it as much. So for them, it's much more about the headline that happens. Like, wow, okay, this company got breached via a vector that I didn't even know about. And so for them, it's much more interesting to talk about how that happened and the other ways that can occur, and what that might look like from their perspective. Like, what should they be looking for? How can they get access to information? So I think it depends a lot on the individual. And it's one of the things I learned a lot about Founder is not just to sort of project your own reality straight onto everyone else. Like, you have to listen to people, like, talk to CISOs and security, just get to know them and understand how they think about things, and just sort of meet them where they're at.
Yeah, that's great advice. That really is for those listening who are like, either, I view it either in a place where you're trying to solve the same type of issue, not the exact same problem that Adam's solving, but if you're kind of in that, I view the threat landscape in a different way than other companies do and whatnot. Like, Adam's advice here is enormous in maybe a way to help approach that market base, number one, but number two, also to make sure how you're positioning yourself as well. It's really easy. And Adam, we had a guest on the show earlier who I like that you talked about building towards the relationships that you're going to form as your company grows. Because we had a guest on the show earlier, not earlier today, but an earlier day, who talked about, not building a startup just to get an exit. Like, hey, one day I'm just going to get rich, right? I hope, right? And I feel like you're saying very similar advice. And when I hear something multiple times like this, I'm like, they've got it figured out, right? They've got this idea in mind, which is, I'm not building a thing because I'm hoping to get a payday one day. I'm building this because I see an issue. I want to solve that issue, and I want to work with the other humans to help solve that issue as well.
Yeah, I mean,
that's amazing. Amazing
yeah,
part of that journey.
I agree with that fully. And honestly, you can't just focus on an exit. It's such a consuming journey. Like, it's incredible, but it's really hard work. Like, there's a lot going on. I say to my wife, she's like, you're really working long hours and you're really stressed. Like, are you enjoying this? I was like, yeah. But I say to her, don't feel sorry for me. Like, well, if you're going to feel sorry for me, feel sorry for me as someone who's 3/4 of the way up Mount Everest and chose to be there. Right? It's like, I'm still sitting there going,
yeah.
why did I do this? Like, what am I doing? Is this the right thing to do?
Mm-hmm.
But you're still like, wow, this is incredible. And my point being is, it takes so much commitment in every day, and ups and downs. If you don't do it because you love it and you're making an impact, then I don't know how you get through the journey. Like, you wouldn't just walk up, if you walked up Everest just for the fame, I think it'd be a very, very different journey before being really, really passionate about it. So I'm fortunate. I mean, I don't come from a wealthy background. Like, my family, I grew up on like state sponsored accommodation, and housing and everything else. And I don't come from a rich family at all. And so for me, I've never been money driven. In fact, having an exit, I worry about, because I don't want to stand out from my background and my family and my friends that are there. So for me, it's incredibly pure. Like I never thought about that. It's been very much about moving the needle and actually making a difference in the industry. And then my practitioner roots really cemented that. So I never really thought about that. I think, you know what I mean? It's just sort of normal. It's just natural to me. But I think it's good general advice for founders. Just don't try and focus on a pay packet. Focus on what you learn. It's pretty true for all careers, to be honest. Like not even just founding a company. Like you've got to follow your heart and love what you do, and then you don't feel like you're working a daily life. So
that's right. If you love what you do, it's never work, right?
exactly.
It's just showing up to the keyboard. Let's look at the other side of this, Adam. Being in a new space like this, and I'm going to say, we've already talked about the newness of this and why we're referring it to that. So from a new protective space for identity and for things like that, how do you go about kind of, and without naming names, obviously, but how do you go about assessing competition? Is it something where there's obviously a first mover and then everyone else sees you getting some success, so they just kind of bolt it on to what they've got? Does it fuel other startups? Like, what's the competition landscape look like for you?
Yeah, that's been really, really interesting for me, because the company I was in before, I was very, very early in the EDR space, and we built a proprietary EDR from scratch. And actually, the company I worked for got acquired to get to that technology. And so when I was in that space, we were in there kind of early, but then very, very quickly it grew into very competitive, what they call red ocean. So every deal you went into was about battle cards, and it was about understanding as much as you could about all the different competitors, and you were always in tender processes with 5 or 6 other people, and that was just what it was like. This new emerging space, is very rare that we're in a competitive deal, and actually what we're competing with is the legacy way of doing things. So people are trying to find out what applications people are signing up to, what identities are being created, and what their vulnerable attack surface looks like, by looking at firewall logs and CASBs and those sorts of things that just don't give you the level of depth that you need. You can look at firewall logs and you can see how many people are signing up to ChatGPT, but you can't tell, for example, whether or not they've created with a password that's been leaked on the internet, and whether they've got MFA enabled. And you can't tell if there's one tenant just by looking at the URL, or if there are 25 different tenants, right? So people try to do that level, and then we're coming in and saying, look, we know that you're doing that internally, but here's how you can level that up, make it a lot easier. This is going to give you more granularity. So short answer is, we compete with the legacy way of trying to solve the problem more than we do with other vendors that are solving a similar problem to us.
How tough of a conversation? Because I tell you right now, I know tons of folks who are having to face that same battle. And again, I view this as kind of a summary, not a summary, but a little bit of a culmination of what you've described here, right? I see the threat landscape in a different way. I see what adversaries are doing. I see a solution that no one else out there appears to see. So you're almost coming to the table with like, okay, look, there's this thing going on. I know it's happening and I can help solve it, but you might not be aware of it, right? And someone turns around and is like, yeah, no, we've got it covered, right? As your biggest maybe hurdle that you've got to help folks jump over and things like that. I want to ask, and again, I don't want to know any names, but do you ever have anyone just kind of stick in the mud and say, no, we're good. It's not going to be us. Not at all. Never going to happen.
Oh yeah, a lot. And I think that's not unusual. I mean, when we were doing targeted attacks, people would, there were times where we were doing red teams, and we would be doing very, very, they were very, very targeted engagements against big enterprises. Actually, famously, a very, very large, well-known security company that have a very sophisticated intel team wrote a blog about a Russian APT group, and it was actually us, and we had to contact them and go, oh hey, this is actually us doing testing against. So they were the types of attacks we were doing, like very, very novel attacks. And anyway, when we were doing these engagements, sometimes you were going up against people who didn't do the detection themselves, but they had an MSP, and so like a managed security service provider or whatever externally. Yeah, and at that time it was crazy because we were like, look, we've got full control of, we've got enterprise admin across the whole domain controller, and they'd be like, no, we've ran antivirus and we've done checks and we can't see anything there. No, that's not true. And
Mm-hmm.
we're like, no, here's a screenshot of what was happening. We're like, it was really hard to get. Even if you showed people the evidence, they sort of didn't see that. So you have the same thing now. I think the equivalent here is people go, oh yeah, but I've got everything behind. You've got FIDO, hardware-based authentication, and everything's behind SSO. That's the
Mm-hmm.
big thing that we see, and I have not yet seen one company that has actually got that pulled off. When they actually deploy and get the visibility, it's very different. So what people imagine they have is every employee has one identity, which is in their SSO, and then they have a YubiKey which connects to that, and everything's connected beneath it. But what it actually looks
Mm-hmm.
like is you have your SSO provider, and then you have like 5 other identity providers behind it. Like you can use Salesforce as an IDP, GitHub as an IDP, you have Microsoft Okta,
Mm-hmm.
then you have applications that don't support SAML, and so then you have other ones which are on SSO, but you can still log in with a local password, right? So if you have an
Mm-hmm.
application which has, let's say, someone signs up to an application like, I don't know, Miro or Dropbox or whatever it may be, and they have 50 local user accounts, and if someone finds it and plugs it onto SSO, those 50 user accounts underneath still exist and don't get deleted. So someone can still do cred
Mm-hmm.
stuffing and compromise them. So what I'm saying is I think that at the moment there's a mental model of single identity all behind SSO, and the reality is much more complex. There's layers of identities that exist behind that, under and over it, and everything else. And it's sort of, you could draw the diagram out, and that's the bit that people are starting to realize is, okay, there's more complexity to this, and it's harder to actually sort of get into that single identity state. Yeah, that's probably the big difference that we hear in people.
That's a fascinating hurdle, I think, to first off combat from a push perspective. That's a huge thing to tackle, I think, and like I'm really appreciating the I see the problem differently, viewpoint. Number one. Number two, though, it's I there's lots of analogies, metaphors, and anecdotes that circle around this. I'm not going to use them. Those you listening can fill in your own if you want. But it's almost kind of one of those like, hey, I don't want to tell you your security posture is a little ugly, but unfortunately, it's a little ugly. But I'm not here to tell you it looks bad. I'm here to tell you it's readily exploitable, right? It's ready to get in there. So I view this as, and I'm going to share my own personal thought on this, and Adam or Jess, I'd love for your thought on this too. But I view this as kind of a paradigm shift that has happened in cybersecurity over the while, where there used to be a lot of fear mongering, a lot of fear driving. FUD is a well-known acronym by lots of folks out there because it seemed to be for a while the only way to get anyone to pay attention was to wait for him to get a breach, and then checkbooks would open up. And while that's great as you're an incident responder, it doesn't do well for someone whose job is to protect enterprise security. And Adam, I think what you're calling out here is that there's actually a shift, a change in the winds, and it's probably a few years in development, but folks are now more in tune with what adversaries can do. It's just not knowing how it can impact them in their organization. So it's kind of like we're halfway there, right? Okay,
Yeah.
I know how they can break in. I just don't know if I'm vulnerable to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm really glad that FUD era is past, because there was a time where it was just too much. It was all fear and sort of a bit crazy. And you're seeing much more of a balance now. But I think also, just to pick up another point, it's like if you're doing something that's new and novel, people find it insightful. Like we do a lot of public speaking, we do a lot of research, we talk about this, but generally we go and talk to customers. You don't try and push this reality on them. Like the reality is the security teams, as I said, I've been like virtual CISO, I've been internal, I've seen a lot of security teams, and they have to deal with a lot, right? There's a lot of problems, and it's like they don't really want new ones. And so sometimes it's, as I said before, it's like it's insightful to help and go, look, I specialize in this area. Let me tell you about this because it's a good thing to know about. But actually, it's also said what meeting people where they're at. So, for example, we go out and say, look, there are thousands of different applications like Dropbox, like Zapier, and employees can just sign up to them, put company data in them, and you can just, they can all be compromised. And you can keep saying that to people, and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I can hear that, but it's like an unknown unknown. But for example, when ChatGPT and the big buzz around AI happened, that was the thing that people, okay, employees are signing up and putting company data into that thing. I need to solve that problem. And so rather than just blinding everyone with all this information, we just say, hey, you know that ChatGPT problem you've got? To us, it's just an application. It's just another identity. It's exactly the same. But we just say to people, look, we can help you with that particular problem and, you know, find out who's signing up to this application, if or not they put company data in there, and whether or not there's a vulnerable identity, and just that part, that side. And it's just, you're sort of building bridges into the thing that you're talking about. And then you're having the conversation. So, actually, you know, people are doing this to Dropbox as well, and it looks like there's a shadow AWS workload where this is happening, and you get more insights from that. So I'm just saying, you sort of, you know, take people's existing problems, help them with that side, and then it can kind of open up, and they can relate to it a lot better, I think.
I love that. That's solid advice. That's amazing, Adam. I've got a lot of notes to take away from this one for sure.
Yeah, no, this has been great, and definitely love that you're solving a really unique challenge, and you know, I think it's really exciting. But I would love to hear, you know, Adam, who or what is your biggest inspiration in life?
I think in terms of founders, I'm going to say Doug Song and John Aberhard. And the reason I say that, so they were the founders of Duo Security, and I've always been a fan of Duo, right? And it's not because of their exit and their product, both of which were incredible, but that's just kind of the obvious part. For me, it wasn't what they built as much as the way they built it, right? And I'm very fortunate now that when we started Push, we said, look, if Push was a person and it needed a mentor, who would it be? And it was Duo. And so now today, Doug and John are both investors in Push, and John Oberheid's on our board, and so they continue to be an inspiration to us. And so we've learned a lot from them. But as I said, it's the way they built the company. And what I mean by that is, you're talking about FUD. They swam against the tide in that era. They were right in the middle of it when there was lots of fear, lots of, you know, that kind of marketing. And their thing was all about positivity. It was like, look, we can help you build a solid, simple solution that's going to help the masses. So they put a lot of emphasis on customer love. They tracked, you know, customer NPS scores. They were proud about that, and that actually reflected itself internally inside the company and the culture, because hearing all this great positive feedback all the time makes you as an employee feel good and proud of what you're doing. And so the culture actually inside Duo is so strong. You can tell that because of our ties with Duo Security, we have, you know, we're thankful to get to interact with a lot of the ex Duo employees who are incredibly talented. But the thing I really noticed is that, you know, obviously Duo went through an acquisition with Cisco, and it's very, very natural for some people to sort of call that a chapter change and move on to something else. And so many of the ex-Duo employees are looking for Duo again. You know, they're like, it made my career. It was a huge chapter. It was a very important part of my life. I loved it there, and I just want another go like that. And sort of going around. And I think when that happens, it's very, very clear that they built something very, very special in the industry. And so, yeah, as I said, what they built, very impressive, but the way they built it, I think, was one of a kind, and not many people have pulled that off. And so, yeah, we're super inspired by that.
That's awesome. That's great. I got to go back and revisit that story now. I believe that's one that's been well documented as well, Adam, at least from a, I knowing kind of the history of how Duo got to where they got and everything, probably pre exit and everything as well, is something that I know has been well documented. Duo is one of those companies that I've seen around. Let me rephrase. I'm very aware of who Duo is, but kind of when they first got started, when it was first a thing, I remember just seeing them around at events and conferences, and it was just a different energy that was there. So it's easy to see why you're pulling from that. That's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Very cool. Well, this has been an amazing, amazing discussion, Adam. It's been awesome to get to chat with you. I think you've had some really insightful pieces of advice for other founders out there, but I'm also going to say for folks who are, I'm also a former security practitioner, and hearing you speak about how valuable that importance is for you now, because it's given you a lot of perspective, I think is something for fellow security practitioners out there who are maybe younger in their career and thinking, hey, maybe one day I'll be able to be, on the other side of that microphone. It's about understanding, the value you're providing now, and then hoping to translate that and carry it over. And this has been such an insightful and great look into it. I know for our founders who are going to be listening, they're going to be taking notes and hit and repeat again and again, Adam. So thank you for sharing your journey and sharing your knowledge with us. It's been great to hear. We do have one final wrap-up question for you, but before we get there, I want to give you about a minute or so if you'd like to give us all that quick elevator pitch for Push Security. And I think we've got an idea of what you do now, but I'd love to hear the succinct version from you before we throw that final question at you.
Yeah, no, of course. So, yeah, we help companies to defend against identity-based attacks. So the idea is browser plugin or a sensor that sits inside all the employees' browsers. You just deploy it out via MDM to all of any of the main browsers. Basically, we have wide support for lots of different browsers there. And then we create and generate a very, very unique telemetry source, which goes back to a central platform and can be pulled out via APIs and everything else back into a SIM or wherever you want it to go. And the reason for that telemetry is we sort of broadly break our product into two offerings. We have a proactive piece, which I think the industry is starting to call identity security posture management, where we observe identities as they're created and used by employees, flag ones that are vulnerable so that the team can go, okay, I want to reduce the ones that aren't needed and patch the ones that are vulnerable and actually just limit the attack surface. And then what the industry is calling identity threat detection and response, ITDR, where we'll actually observe identity-based attacks. So we'll do things like if an employee logs into the IDP, we'll pin that password to that login screen so it cannot be entered anywhere else. So if they try to enter into a phishing site, it gets blocked, you get alerted. But then we also do detection around much more advanced techniques like advanced phishing frameworks like Evil Jinx and session hijacking and those sorts of things as well.
That's awesome. All right, Adam, if you could give the next founder that we talk to one piece of advice, what would that be?
Yeah, great question. There's so many, so many. If I had to pick one, I mean, maybe I'll try and pick something that might be a little different. It depends what other people have said, but the thing that's quite close to my heart is, as a founder, you're always going to be balancing short-term and long-term objectives. And it's really important to keep a close dial on where you sit on that spectrum. I've sat both sides. So I've seen companies like my own startups and things and projects, and from talking to other founders, I've seen what happens if you over-index on short-term and reject long-term, and if you do the other way around, right? So, for example, you can go out and just go through a normal sales motion and sell, and you can, create a fancy website that has lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of features on it. But when you get into the product, they're all badly implemented. You're going to get lots of quick sales, but then you're going to struggle to scale later, right? It gets harder and harder to do. So product-led growth, I think, is a really good example of this. You can go completely sales-led. You might get yourself to 1, 5, 10 million ARR, and then it gets much, much harder to scale after that. And so, but similarly, if you focus completely on long-term and you just went product-led and you didn't do any sales-led, then it's going to take you a long time to get going, and speed is everything. So I think of it a lot about like pit stops. You're going around on a car race, and you could never pit stop. You never think about that long term. You just keep doing laps, and you're 5 laps ahead of everyone else. But you go too hard, and the engine blows, and you're out of the race. Or eventually you stop, and everyone overtakes you anyway. So it's just this real balance between focusing between short term and long term goals and keeping them balanced all the time.
Awesome. That's a fantastic piece. Adam, I can't tell you how much that's resonating with me right now. And not only some of the discussions that I have on a day-to-day, but also some of the other problems that I see folks have as well. So thank you. That's been useful. It's been great having you here. Thank you. Take care. Jess, I'll see you again soon.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.